right. Excuse me. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the best bets from this upcoming weekend. Definitely some that I feel really good about, including both those service academies, getting big time wins, covering those spreads, and moving on to possibly get a big time matchup at the end of the year. But let's get to a little bit of a headline and injury wrap up because there's quite a few injuries and there's quite a few headlines that I want to make sure I have on y'all's radar. And we'll start over there in Jacksonville, where there's been a little bit of a mix-up to the Georgia-Florida game, at least over the next couple of years. It sounds like the Georgia-Florida game is going to move away from Jacksonville for the 2026 and 2027 season, so they will be there next year. But after that, they will move to Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta for 2026, Raymond James Stadium in Tampa Bay for 2027. So do a pseudo home and home, I suppose. But Jacksonville, the Jaguars are undergoing a lot of renovation for Everbank Stadium in those years, so they're going to move out of there, hopefully move back once that's done. That being said, I don't like this at all. I think it's very, very ridiculous. I think it's one of those things where you find a way to thread the needle between the two things that we want. We either want it to be in Jacksonville and you keep it in Jacksonville. Now, I understand construction is construction. I'm not necessarily going against that, or go to the campuses. And I understand also, if you went to the campuses for the 2 years, it's probably not making its way back to Jacksonville. So I understand it from that perspective. But overall, it's one of those chances you had to put a couple of Georgia-Florida games on campuses, get all of the buzz around those games, and then you could go back to Jacksonville. Maybe you could make that decision, but at the end of the day, give the fans what they want, even for 2 years. Give the fans a little bit of juice in those stadiums, and possibly make this one a little bit of a home and home going forward. I'm kind of indifferent on where this game is played. I do think Jacksonville's a fun place. I think home and home would be absolutely special in this game. So I'm kind of indifferent. I think home and home might be a little bit more my speed, but definitely one where I don't want it in two different NFL stadiums on back-to-back years. That is for sure. But moving forward to the Big 12, they had a little bit of a concern this past weekend, or these past couple of weeks around Texas Tech. There's been a little bit of an issue with helmet communications. At least Texas Tech thought there was a couple of issues. They felt like their games were compromised by other teams during that time, and they asked the Big 12 to look into the loss to Baylor a couple of weeks ago, and then the loss this past weekend to TCU. And they're going to have to figure out, where they move on from here. But sounds like nothing happened here. At least the Big 12 has said there is no proof to believe that these things were obstructed, that these things were messed with or tampered with in any way during the game. So not necessarily something we're going to have to worry about right now. This is something that's going to come up quite a bit. I can almost promise you that. The same way sign stealing and all of that stuff was kind of in the background, this is probably going to be a little bit in the background of college football for quite some time. Obviously, it's not necessarily something you have to worry about until we really have to worry about it, until we have a real case. But as of right now, nothing to really worry about over there at Texas Tech. Definitely something that we're going to be on the lookout for as we move forward with this new world of helmet comms. Then we'll move forward to that Big Ten and Michigan State, Michigan, that little bit of a scuffle, not even a little bit, a huge scuffle that they got into after that game. It sounds like the Big Ten is not going to punish Michigan State or Michigan for that. Now, the melee started after Davis Warren took the knee, and you got into, it was Anthony Jones on the Michigan State side, and then Colston Loveland, the tight end for Michigan, kind of got into it. It got a little bit of headbutting, a little bit of pushing and shoving, and that turned into a whole lot more. This one got very, very aggressive at midfield, and it was one of those things that you see every now and then on a college football field, but it definitely catches you by surprise every single time you see it. I don't love that they're not punishing anyone. I don't necessarily think they have to go really aggressively in one direction or the other, but I think this sets a little bit of a bad precedent. I don't necessarily think teams are going to start brawling each other by any means every single weekend, but I do think this could really only come back to hurt the Big Ten. This could really only come back to possibly happen again. And then if you punish that team, then they're questioning why didn't you punish those two teams. So I do think the two that started it, Anthony Jones and Colston Loveland, should have been punished. I also think Khalil Mullings should have been punished. If you saw the video, he was doing a little bit too much, and he was getting a little bit too involved in that brawl, in that melee, in the whatever you want to call it. It was a big time fight, and it's one of those things that I think as a conference, you just have to say something. You don't necessarily have to ban anyone. You don't necessarily have to fine them incredible amounts of money. You got to do something. You got to stand up, and you have to make sure that that is absolutely tamped out. Now it is not, and we'll see what happens going forward, but definitely something that I don't necessarily love the decision on, and I probably would have made it differently if I was in the Big Ten shoes. But moving forward, I want to give you guys a little bit of a head coaching update from around the country. We have 3 FBS head coaching jobs that are open right now. It is Rice, Southern Miss, Rice, Southern Miss, and ECU. 3 schools that are kind of on that little bit of a tier right now. They're a little bit teetering in that group of 5 area where ECU has the ability to be a really good program, hasn't been there in a couple of years. I think Southern Miss is the exact same way. And then for Rice, it's going to be a little bit harder, but definitely some guys out there that you can go get. So for ECU, I think there's a lot of guys that could be up for this job. It feels like it's Joe Sloan's job if he wants it. So we'll have to figure that out towards the end of the year as he really gets engaged in those conversations a little bit more, probably after that Alabama game. One way or the other, he will start to get involved in those conversations, and I do think he's probably the guy if he does want this job. Now, if he doesn't, then I think Garrett Riley over at Clemson could be a very good choice. I think there's a number of guys around that area. There's a D coordinator at Georgia Tech, actually Tyler Santucci, that was at UNC last year. So definitely something to watch there. A number of other coordinators around that area that absolutely could be up for this job. But as of right now, it feels like it's Joe Sloan's job to lose, and we'll see what happens down the stretch of the season. Then you got Rice. I think Rice is a very interesting job for so many different reasons. They're in a recruiting hotbed that is Houston. They also have to deal with every other Texas team coming into that hotbed and stealing all the good players from it. And they have to deal with how good of a school it is. It is the best school in Texas academically, and they have to deal with that in the recruiting process of that of the football team. They have to make sure that it is known that certain things have to be done at Rice that don't have to be done at Houston, that don't have to be done at Texas or Texas A&M. So definitely a little bit of a more of an uphill battle, and you'll probably have to find someone that has had to deal with that in the past. The 2 names that immediately came to mind for me were Buster Faulkner, the Georgia Tech offensive coordinator, obviously has dealt with that over his time at Georgia Tech, and then Tim Beck, the Vandy OC, definitely someone that has dealt with that as well. So I think it could be a very interesting job and one that really could turn into something special. You got to hire the right guy, and it's not always easy to hire the right guy at a place that is so academically inclined like Rice. Then you got Southern Miss, another job that I think is really, really interesting and one that I really think could become an awesome job. I think could become a very, very good team and really put themselves in a great position moving forward. I think Will Stein is probably the guy to watch here. I think there's a number of guys around there, but when you talk about a lot of these different openings, you're going to find a lot of those OCs around these elite teams around the country, whether it's Will Stein at Oregon or maybe Kyle Flood at Texas, maybe Joe Sloan obviously at LSU, a couple other guys that absolutely are going to have a say here. And I think it's going to be one of those where you'll probably get a Will Stein. You'll probably get a little bit younger of a coach, and I think it's one of those jobs that's just waiting for the right coach to come there and really get things off and running, kind of like Billy Napier at Louisiana a couple of years ago. And then on another note, that game over there in Gainesville, Florida, if Billy Napier is to lose that one, I don't think he's the coach on Monday of Florida. I'll just put it that way. We'll see what happens there, but definitely one to watch as we head into this weekend. But talking about that Florida game, apologies. But then we'll get into that Pitt SMU game, a huge, huge one for that team. Actually, sorry, I had a couple of injury updates around the Ohio State game, but realize now that I don't have a picture. But quickly, the Ohio State game, the Zen Mikowski is not going to go in this game. They'll have to figure out who their left tackle is. Could be Donovan Jackson, could be a couple other guys on that team. So definitely something to watch. And going up against Abdul Carter, not necessarily ideal, I'll put it that way. And then on the other side, I do think Drew Aller is going to go in this game. I think it's going to be one of those things where maybe he's not 100%, but it seems like he's going to be at least close enough to go in this game. And then you got Anthony Donko, Danny Dennis Sutton, 2 linemen, 1 left tackle, 1 defensive tackle, going to be huge spots. They're definitely kind of in weird spots going into this game, going to be huge players, and you definitely need them. And if they don't go, then things get a little bit sketchy for Penn State. But now we can move forward. Apologies for that mix-up, but now we can move forward to that Georgia-Florida game. For Georgia, these aren't injuries, but Dan Jackson, Janelle Aguero will be out for the first half of this game because they got targeting calls against Texas that I didn't love by any means, but that's the way it is. They will not be in the first half of this game, so maybe the Gators try to take a couple of deep shots early on in this one. And then you got Tate Ratledge and Jordan Hall. They're both probable for this game. 2 guys on both lines of scrimmage that they have been waiting quite a while to get back, but it sounds like they will be ready to go in this game. Would be huge for this team, and finally, we would see this D-line for Georgia at full strength for the first time really this entire season. And then for Florida, the 2 biggest pieces of news for Florida heading into this one are Montrell Johnson is questionable heading in. probably need him if you're going to be able to get this one done. So definitely something to watch. And then Eugene Wilson or Trey Wilson will be out for this game. So a couple of big time playmakers on offense that will not be there. A little bit more on DJ Lagway's shoulders as he heads into this weekend. Then we got Pitt SMU. This is really just all about the quarterbacks here. It sounds like Kevin Jennings is going to go. He went down with a little bit of a knee injury in that Duke game. Got hit pretty good, no doubt about that. But it's one of those things that SMU is going to need him here. It sounds like he's optimistic that he will be able to go in this game. I think he's on that field. If he's not, or even if he's not 100%, definitely takes an aspect away from this SMU offense that they're probably going to need here. And then for Pitt, the big news here is around the quarterbacks as well. Eli Holstein will be back in this game. He got banged up late in that Syracuse game, but he'll be ready to roll in this one. It's going to be a huge one and definitely one that seems to be ready to live up to the hype. Then we got a couple of quarterback updates for you real quickly. We have Curtis Rourke. He's going to go in this game this upcoming weekend against Michigan State for Indiana. We'll see how close to 100% he is, but definitely a player that Indiana is very happy to see back, and they're going to need healthy down the stretch of this season. And then over at Iowa, they have a new starter in Brendan Sullivan. He came and had a great performance last weekend. I think he helps this offense a ton. A little bit of running ability on him and has just all the ability to make this offense just run efficiently. It doesn't need to be perfect. It's probably not going to be perfect, but at the very least, you're moving the ball down the field, staying in front of the sticks. That's the ultimate goal in that Iowa offense. And then a couple of extra injury notes here. Trey Harris is questionable for that Arkansas game. He was out last week. Definitely one to watch as we head into this week because it takes a huge, huge aspect out of that Ole Miss offense, and that's exactly what Arkansas needs. Now, the Arkansas offense has taken a big-time hit. Jaquindon Jackson is highly questionable, as Sam Pittman put it, for the matchup against Ole Miss. Going to be really tough if Arkansas does not have this guy. Definitely someone that they need to pull that upset. But Braylon Russell is ready to roll. Very, very talented freshman that stepped up huge in that Tennessee game. Could be another huge spot for him here. And then you got the Tennessee team. Squirrel White looks like he will return for that Tennessee team, and they need it. They need a guy that can really stretch the ball downfield. They need a guy that just has outright speed, and that's exactly what Squirrel White has. Cannot wait to see him back on the field, and definitely Tennessee fans are very excited about that news. No doubt about that. So a huge week ahead. So many different things that are going to happen this upcoming weekend. Feels like one of those weeks where you're going to want to look over your shoulder. Just make sure that everything is in order. Make sure that you're fully watching these games because I think it could get a little bit wild and definitely set us up for a crazy November down the stretch of this season. But thank you so much for listening to this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you can want. So anything in the world of sports that you need, we have you totally covered over here at GSMC. But thank you once again for listening. Go enjoy some football this weekend, and we will talk about it on Monday.